Hi friends, welcome to Patchwork Palooza, Block 5. I'm Pam and I'm popping into your day alongside the release of the Block 5 instructions. I'm here in reference to the description of our block, which says this block does ask a bit more of us, but it's not something that we can't handle together. So I'm popping into your day alongside this release so that I can give you some extra tips and tricks for making this block most successfully and most stress-free. This is our block. It's called Go Your Own Way. Many of you will recognize it as a traditional card trick block. We're calling it Go Your Own Way because it has a nice twirling motion. And it does look a little on the complicated side to do because all of these triangles have to go in a certain direction in order to make this effect. The other thing about this block is that it's normally constructed as a 9-inch block or a 12-inch block, but it doesn't mean that we can't make it at an 8-inch block. It's just a matter of having the right measurements for each of our 9 units when we are ready to assemble them, and using a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Very important for this block, or it will be a little bit on the small side as opposed to being the 8.5 inch unfinished size that we need when we're finished putting this block together. Now, the first thing I want to mention is what is listed right at the top here before we get to the cutting instructions. Since this block involves triangle pieces, all triangle pieces, if we starch our fabric prior to cutting the squares, then we are going to stabilize that fabric a little bit more. It's going to stiffen it up and it's going to reduce the stretch as we assemble our triangles together. So that is going to help us primarily. The other thing that can help us, this is the biggest thing that can help us, is to go ahead and use this diagram here as we have provided for all of our blocks to lay out all of our triangles in the proper configuration. If you look, one of the best gifts I give myself for complicated blocks like this is just to give myself a little swatch sheet. That makes it so easy for me. Okay, well, fabric 1, and that's all of the corners and the sides and the top and the bottom. That's right there, and I don't even have to think about it. Fabric 1, which one is that? Which one is that? I already know. It's right there in my swatch sheet, so that's done. The other thing, and it really doesn't matter whether we have a newer machine or an older machine. There are different ways that we can make our lives easier with respect to defining a scant 1/4 inch. I am using more and more lately. I have a studio machine, a much newer machine. But lately I've been using my friend Jane, who is my Singer Featherweight 1956. Lots of opportunities for me to upgrade my foot. So like I have a 1/4 inch foot, but it doesn't tell me what a scant 1/4 inch is. None of our presser feet do. We can get a presser foot that's for scant 1/4 inch, but I don't think it's available for this, and it's not available for everyone. I recommend something called diagonal seam tape. This product is made by Cluck Cluck Sew, and it's a reel of tape, if you will. And the beauty of this product is that you only ever need one because you don't go through. You can replace this many times on your machine. What I like about this is that I line this red line up with my needle, and this outline, this final line here, outside line, goes right along the outside edge of my 1/4 inch seam foot. And the beauty is that if I know that this is right on the edge of my 1/4 inch foot, then just on the inside, if I line my fabric up and I sew just on the inside of that line, there's my scant 1/4 inch. And this is how I get successful scant 1/4 inch seam allowances all the time. One of my favorite tools. Beyond that, you're going to start with your center unit, and your directions, even though you've laid this all out, your directions are laid out such that they are going to tell you how to create each one of these units, and you're going to be able to follow along with the instructions, even though you've got this all laid out. You will note in these instructions that while I normally try to give you as much flexibility to press in whatever direction you want to press with your seams, this one I've tried to give you some extra instruction by recommending that you press them each one in a certain direction so that these nest. That's going to help us with our flattest block as well, because there are so many seams coming together here. So you'll want to pay attention to those pressing instructions so that you're the most successful with getting your block as flat as possible. So as we are pressing our center unit together, your block or your fabric 2 fabric is going to be sewn to your fabric 3 square or 3 triangle. And the best suggestion, and it says in your instructions, you want to start at this top square edge as best you can when you're sewing triangles together. It's not always possible. Like in the case of sewing this unit to this unit, we're going to have to start at our point and go. But if we can start here at this blunt edge, we've got the best chance of really making sure that we're getting a nice start to our seam here before we go down. Scant 1/4 of an inch is going to be really, really important. Also, if you've got an older machine, this is where you're really going to want to grab that thread and let it guide it through as you get started. Apart from that, working with triangles, you really want to let your feed dogs do their work. You want to let them take that fabric through instead of pulling it, because pulling it is just going to give us more opportunity for stretch, and we don't want that. So apart from that, following those pressing instructions when you're joining together. Now at this point, I have a little sample center already put together. So you can see that I've got a nice flat seam because I've nested my seams right there. Now we need this unit and every other unit here to measure 3 1/8 inch square. And it's very complicated in your mind to look at a square and go, well, how do I trim that? The easiest way I have found is a suggestion by my daughter, a 3 1/8 inch piece of cardstock, measured accurately and cut to 3 1/8 inch, and then a line diagonally. Then that's going to help us see right where our center point is. So we're going to put a pin right in that center point, and we're going to put that center point of that pin right in the center point of our block. And you can see that our lines are going to line up, and we're going to be able to trim right around all of that. 2 ways to do that. We can draw a line all the way around, following this around to give ourselves something to see to cut that on. Or the other thing we could do is take our ruler and line our 3 1/8 inch piece of cardstock beneath it, and where you see that center point, make a little dot with a Sharpie. For those of you who are stressed about making a dot that's going to be permanent, we'll talk about that in a second. So now what we can do here, and the best idea I have is to use a little rotating mat. Doesn't necessarily have to have lines or anything. You don't need that. And then you're going to line up that dot right in the center of your block, and you're going to make sure that you've got your diagonal line is right lined up with that, and then you can trim this, and then you can turn, and then you can turn this around, and you can trim this, and then you've got an accurate 3 1/8 inch unit. That technique is going to work with all of your units as you assemble your quilt. Now, as you get your units all together, It really, what matters most with the scant 1/4 inch seam allowance is when we are assembling the block. When we have this block together, we have a lot of seams coming together here. So if we are sewing with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we are pressing in the directions that the instructions suggest for your blocks, when you are working on your final joining of all of your 9 units, you're going to press the first row down, the second row up, and the third row down. That way, those seams are going to nest right there as you are assembling your block. And at the end, I pressed my seam allowances open. This gave me the flattest seam possible. And my block is 8.5 inches. If your block is a little bit smaller than that or a little bit bigger than that, I don't want you to sweat it. I don't want you to stress about it. That's quilting, and that is how we take time a little bit later on and we wedge that in next to that. You're going to have on all sides, you're going to have a sashing strip, and you're going to be able to wedge that in. You don't want it to be too far off 8.5 inches, but we can wiggle that in if we are just a little bit patient. But that's why if you are using all of the techniques and tips and tricks that I have shared today, you will stand the best chance of getting this block to measure 8.5 inches if you play your cards right. Anyway, I'm wishing you luck. If there are any questions that you have or comments, ways that you can support your fellow members with assembling this block, I hope that you will put them right in the comments of this little video so that I can watch it, so that your fellow members can watch it, so that we can all be the most successful with this block, because it's really a beauty.